Readers are a lot like fish. They stink if you put them in the microwave, and everyone at the office will hate you. Hooking the reader refers to the initial grabbing of their attention. It's all the elements presented in the beginning of a story that gets the reader interested and invested. This might be the first line, the first paragraph, or the first chapter, depending on how long the work is. The reader needs to be drawn into your novel, not by a barbed metal prong, but rather by the quality of your writing. You can have an amazing story, but if you don't properly hook the reader at the outset, then it won't matter. Speaking of attaching people to things, please consider attaching yourself to my channel by subscribing. You'll get hooked on my videos or something. I'm getting tired of these fish metaphors. I think the hook of your story really boils down to two things. You need to ground the reader into the story, that is, introduce them gently into it, and you need to offer them something compelling, something that will make them curious to know more. To continue to overwork the fish metaphor, the grounding part of your hook is the barbed metal part that sticks into the fish's mouth, and the compelling part is the lure or the bait that attracts them to the hook. You need both in order to attach the sharp metal thing into their mouth. Let's start by talking about the grounding part of the hook. There's a saying out there that goes, "Be clear, not clever," and this is something you should think about when you're thinking about your hook. The critical moment of reader hookage is also the point where they know the least about your story. Their relationship with your story is at its most fragile point. They don't know the characters yet, they might not know the setting, they don't know anything about the conflict. You need to get the reader over these initial hurdles. A hook needs to create curiosity in the reader, but don't confuse curiosity with confusion. You will confuse the reader if you present too little information about what's going on, you will overwhelm them if you present too much information, and you will lose them if whatever you present is not clear. If it takes 3 pages for the reader to learn that we're on a spaceship, then that's a problem. If a character walks down the street for 3 blocks before we realize that their best friend is walking beside them, then that's a problem. If your fantasy novel introduces 14 proper nouns that mean nothing to the reader on the first page, then that's a problem. You don't need to get all of that information across. Remember, too much information is just as bad as not enough information. Focus on an important part of the opening. Are we in the desert? Is the main character in a fight? Are they on a ship that's just hit an iceberg? 1 or 2 details that will let them know the general sense of what's happening in the opening. One very easy way to mess this up is to not focus on the present. Your opening should be very focused on the present moment, on what's happening right now in the story. Not the events leading up to this, not on the character's backstory. We want to be... The almost dead flashlight cast a dim light, but Joe could still clearly see the bloody footprints which danced across the ceiling. If your character is in a dark room looking up at bloody footprints on the ceiling with a flashlight, that's enough information to ground the reader in what's going on. Everyone will be able to picture that scene well enough. We don't need to know that the character got the job at the asylum 3 weeks ago, or that they drive a Toyota Corolla, or that they have an associate's degree in landscape floral design, which is why they're working as a night janitor at an asylum. Any movement in time, which includes exposition and backstory, will ruin a good hook. There will be time to reveal this stuff later on, and the reader will be more inclined to learn about this stuff once you've grounded them in the story and presented them with something compelling. If you do have something important, backstory or exposition related, that you need to get across in your opening for whatever reason, try to imply those things through a scene that is happening in the present. Give hints to those things rather than stopping your hook to deliver a bunch of that information. Now, even though the first part of the hook is about clarity, you need to understand that clear doesn't mean boring. In fact, boring is the last thing your hook should be. I can know exactly what's going on in your story, but if nothing interesting is happening, then you don't have a hook. Something like the example I gave before of the night janitor in a dark room looking up at bloody footprints on the ceiling is probably pretty compelling. Footprints on the ceiling, in blood of all things, implies that something odd is happening. Dark room is good to set the tone, and depending on how you actually write that scene, we could get across some things about the character as well. Maybe you could mention that this is the third night in a row that they've found these footprints and they still don't know what's causing them. A lot of people emphasize action in the opening hook, and that can work, but too much action or action about things that the reader doesn't care about may not be compelling. A big battle scene where a bunch of characters we don't know are getting chopped down is certainly exciting, there's lots of action, but if we don't know any of those characters, and if it doesn't generate any questions in the reader's mind, then it may not be an effective hook. You can arguably measure the quality of a hook by the questions that it sets off. Even a kind of mundane opening can do this. If you show a character washing the dishes and scrubbing a certain knife particularly hard so as to remove the blood and fingerprints on it, that's going to raise some questions. If a character shows airport security a passport with one name on it, but then they give a boarding pass with a different name on it when they're boarding the plane, then that likewise is going to raise some questions. Even though both of those scenes are just a character doing the dishes or a character getting on a plane, we've added some extra details that raise some compelling questions. A good hook is about clearly showing events, not the context around those events. A good writer can make the reader understand what is going on while withholding some of the context of why it's going on, and this is especially important in the hook. A good hook makes the reader curious about the context around events. Bad hooks make the reader curious about the events themselves because they don't understand what the hell is going on. You want to hint at context, hint at backstory, hint at exposition, but let those hints shine through a very clear picture of what's going on. You have limited time in the hook. You have a limited space in the first couple pages of a novel or the first couple paragraphs of a short story. You don't have time for a ton of backstory or exposition or other information. Another thing to remember is all this stuff that goes into writing a good hook shouldn't just happen in the opening of your story. People talk a lot about the first line and the first chapter and the introduction and how hooking the reader is very important, and all of that is very true, but you should be presenting compelling things to the reader throughout your story. A lot of people focus on that first chapter, trying to get the reader hooked at the start, but if you're writing a longer piece of fiction, you can't just rely on that initial hook. The curiosity and the intrigue that comes at the beginning of your story, if it's something like a novel, is not going to last for the entire length of the story. The attitude with which you write your hook should be the attitude with which you write the rest of your story. Yes, there's payoffs and reveals and things that happen later on, but you should never stop presenting compelling things to the reader. They should never stop being curious about how the story is going to play out. As you answer questions, you should pose more questions. If you look hard enough at a hook, you'll just find the formula for compelling writing. Paint the reader a picture that they can easily imagine in their mind, and make sure that they have lots of questions about it. Questions that they want answered, questions that will be answered as they progress through the story. Just like I hope this video answered a bunch of your questions throughout the course of the video. So there you have it. Please remember to subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I think I said thanks for watching like 3 times there.